All right, so now I'm going to go over the Chapter 11 content that we will cover this week. Again, we're not going to cover the whole chapter, so I'm not going to cover this whole presentation. But we'll look at the beginning here where we cover the basics of landscaping. So you want to differentiate between hardscape and softscape. So softscape is the plants, living things. Hardscape are things like pavers and retaining walls and so forth that aren't living things. Just like everything else that we've talked about and you've read in this class, you want to be really careful in your planning when you plan your landscape. So the landscape, by the way, is anything around the house, around the building. And you want to be really careful. You want to look at things like sensitive areas. You want to look at are there any native plants around? Are there any habitats that you want to make sure that aren't compromised? There's really a lot to landscaping. This is really, we're just dipping our toes here to give you the basics. But if you really want to plan a sustainable landscape, it takes a lot of expertise and a lot of planning. And so one thing you want to identify is any invasive species, and you want to get rid of those. To the extent possible, you really want to plant native species, and that will change based on your location. So you can look at your local cooperative extension, or there's any number of certainly organizations, local organizations. Like around in Delaware, you have Delaware Center for Horticulture is a really good place to go. There's you can go to like Nature Conservancy. So you can, if you look around a little bit, you'll be able to find what's native to your location. And you can use landscaping to create more livable space. You can sort of create outdoor rooms. You can create even outdoor kitchens, outdoor dining areas, and so forth. So there's a lot you can do with landscaping. Again, we're not going to cover a lot of it here, but just so you know, there's a lot you can do with different hard and softscapes. So most landscapes aren't very good at retaining water, so they're not good for water resource management because they use a lot of impervious surfaces. So impervious surfaces force water to run off, and that can, as you'll see in a couple of the videos this week, that can overburden local sewer systems. You really want, if at all possible, to get that water to drain back into the soil, back into the water table. So the focus here, again, a lot of the focus in this book is on green buildings, so we'll focus on ways that you can naturally replenish, use landscaping to naturally replenish the water. Right, so these are just examples of a bunch of different landscaping methods and materials. You're probably familiar with a lot of these: patios, paving, retaining walls, and so forth. We'll go over a little bit of rainwater collection systems and rain gardens. Those are pretty novel, and they're ways to naturally recharge the soil. And you can make little water features too, fountains and so forth. But again, most landscaping, most hardscaping is impervious. Pavers are really common, asphalt, concrete. The problem is, again, the water can't drain through these, so it just drains off of them, and you create more runoff, which can overburden the local sewer system. And dark-colored materials create what's called the urban heat island effect, or the heat island effect. So, as you probably know, the darker something is, the more sunlight it absorbs, and so this actually can cause a pretty significant increase in the local temperature and really change the local microclimate. So if you use light-colored hardscaping, you don't have this problem because it actually will decrease absorption. But the heat island effect is something, if you look at, for example, if you look at the temperatures outside a city versus in a city, you'll see that the urban temperatures are always higher, largely because of this urban heat island effect, or their heat island effect. So again, there are, this book does largely focus on sustainable practices. So there are ways to facilitate the reabsorption of water into the local groundwater. Impervious paving, you can use impervious paving to direct water into like a rain garden, which is like a little catchment basin that will either percolate the water back into the soil or allow it to evaporate naturally. You can divert it and use it to irrigate your plants and so forth. A really innovative and interesting application is pervious paving. So pervious paving allows water to actually soak through it. And there's a couple of videos in here that show you some of this. It's pretty fascinating. They can make this with asphalt and concrete, where the water actually drains through the material. And again, you'll see some of these details in the book and in videos that you have to put gravel underneath it, so it gives it a place to hold the water, and then it slowly absorbs back into the soil. So there are ways to do this. This is an image of pervious asphalt. It actually drains through the asphalt, and then eventually drains into the water table. But you can also use impervious surfaces to create porous and permeable environments. So with these, the water doesn't soak through the material, but what it does is you leave enough space. You can see the little cracks here between these pavers. If you leave enough space, and of course you have to underlay it with gravel and possibly sand and so forth, to allow for the water to soak in. So now the water will come, if it comes down on here, it's actually going to filter down through all these little cracks, filter down through the gravel layer, and eventually back into the soil. So you can use impervious surfaces and still allow water to drain back in, and that's considered permeous and porous pavers. And there's different underlayment materials. This is just an example of that. And again, you can, if you're not careful and you use dark colored pavers, they will increase the heat island, or they'll increase the temperature through the heat island effect. And that's it for this part of chapter 11.